There is a quiet relief that can happen when you realize you are not late, not behind, not missing something that everyone else already found. The idea that time is running out has a way of tightening the body before the mind even reacts. It creates a subtle urgency, a pressure that hums in the background, even during moments that are otherwise calm. If you have felt that tension before, it makes sense. Many people have, but it does not mean anything is wrong with you. Before anything else, it helps to slow the pace of this moment. Nothing is asking you to rush. Nothing is asking you to catch up. The sense that there is a deadline approaching, especially one attached to a year or a future marker, can feel convincing. Yet that feeling is not evidence. It is simply a story the nervous system tells when it is trying to orient itself in uncertainty. And uncertainty does not mean danger. It only means something has not fully revealed itself yet. Being stuck is often described as a failure of movement, but that description is incomplete. Illness is not always a lack. Sometimes it is a form of organization that happens quietly without visible signs. There are periods when progress does not announce itself. It does not show up as dramatic change or obvious momentum. It shows up as a kind of pause that feels intentional only in hindsight. While you are inside it, it can feel confusing. From the outside, it might look like nothing is happening. Internally, something very specific is taking shape. If you are here listening to this now, it is not by accident. That does not need to mean anything mystical or exaggerated. It simply means that your attention arrived where it needed to arrive. People often find their way to certain conversations only when they are ready to hear them without strain. Readiness does not always feel active. Sometimes it feels neutral. Sometimes it feels like waiting without impatience. That kind of readiness is easy to overlook because it does not create noise. The fear of being left behind often comes from comparing internal timing with external timelines. But internal timing does not move in straight lines. It does not respond well to pressure. When it is pushed, it tends to slow down rather than speed up. When it is allowed, it tends to unfold naturally. You have not missed your moment. You are not watching a door close. If anything, you are standing in a quiet hallway between spaces where things rearrange themselves before the next opening appears. There is no requirement to understand everything right now. Understanding is not the entry point. Safety is. Calm is. The simple recognition that nothing is chasing you can be enough to let the body soften. From that softer place, perception changes. You begin to notice that what felt like being stuck may actually be a form of precise placement. This moment is not asking you to do anything differently. It is only asking you to notice where you already are. That noticing without judgment creates room. And in that room, the idea of being behind starts to lose its grip. You can breathe there. You can stay there. Nothing needs to move yet. What matters is not how quickly the next phase arrives, but how settled you are when it does. Right now, you are not late. You are exactly where awareness tends to arrive just before things begin to shift. There is a particular kind of experience that is hard to explain unless you are inside it. It is not dramatic. It does not come with strong emotion or obvious struggle. On the surface, life may look stable, even calm. Yet underneath that stability, there is a quiet sense that something is incomplete. Not wrong, just unfinished. It can feel like standing with your shoes on, ready to leave, while nothing around you signals that it is time to go. Many people in this space do not feel lost. They feel aware. They can sense direction without seeing movement. They know what no longer fits, even if what comes next has not yet taken shape. This can create a subtle tension, not sharp enough to demand action, but present enough to be noticed. It is the feeling of being internally prepared while the external world remains still. There may be moments when you wonder why your clarity has not translated into visible change. You might feel emotionally regulated, grounded, even optimistic at times. And yet the forward motion you expected does not arrive. This does not usually create panic. It creates a softer kind of confusion. A question that repeats quietly in the background. Why does it feel like I am ready, but nothing is moving yet? This state often comes with emotional neutrality. You are not deeply unhappy, but you are not fully satisfied either. You are not desperate, but you are not inspired in the way you once were. It can feel like waiting in a well-lit no clock. Time passes, but without clear markers. You may notice that your reactions have softened, that old triggers do not land the same way. At the same time, excitement feels muted, as if it is being held just out of reach. There is also a kind of knowing that accompanies this phase. Not a belief, but a sense. You may feel that something is close without being able to name it. This closeness does not feel urgent. It feels quiet and steady. It does not demand effort. It simply exists. And because it exists without form, the mind struggles to interact with it. The mind wants plans, steps, definitions. This experience offers none of those. You might notice that you are less interested in forcing answers. Conversations that once energized you now feel repetitive. Advice that once sounded useful now feels slightly off. Not wrong, just no longer relevant. This can be confusing because nothing has replaced those things yet. The absence can feel like emptiness even though it is not empty. It is more like a pause between breaths. There is often a subtle frustration here, but it is not loud. It does not push you to take drastic action. It shows up as restlessness during still moments or a sense of being underutilized. You may find yourself thinking, I know there is more, without feeling pressure to chase it. That lack of urgency can make you question whether you are avoiding something. In reality, avoidance usually feels heavy. This feels light, just unresolved. What makes this phase difficult to recognize is that it does not fit common narratives of struggle or success. There is nothing to fix and nothing to celebrate yet. It exists in between. Many people move through this without language for it, assuming it means they are doing something wrong. This experience is not a failure of action or desire. It is a sign that internal alignment is ahead of external confirmation. If this sounds familiar, it is because it is meant to. Not in a way that defines you, but in a way that reflects a shared state. You are not stalled because you lack clarity. You are paused because clarity has already arrived, and something deeper is adjusting to meet it. This phase does not require interpretation. It only requires recognition. And recognition, when it happens without judgment, has a way of easing the quiet friction that comes with waiting. What you are sensing is real, even if it has not yet taken shape. At some point, many people begin to notice that effort no longer produces the results it once did. The strategies are familiar. The intentions are clear. The willingness is present. Yet the usual relationship between trying and movement seems to weaken. This can be confusing, especially for those who are accustomed to growth responding to action. When effort stops working, the first assumption is often that more effort is required. But that assumption belongs to a different phase. Not all forms of resistance are solved by pushing through them. Some are not barriers at all, but signals that the mechanism of change has shifted. When change is driven by action, movement feels responsive. When change is driven by internal state, action can feel strangely ineffective. This is not because something is wrong, but because the center of gravity has moved inward. There are moments when identity begins to update before behavior follows. During these moments, the system prioritizes coherence over speed. It wants alignment to settle before expression resumes. From the outside, this looks like stagnation. From the inside, it feels like effort dissolving into something less tangible. Trying harder in this phase can feel like pressing on a door that is already open, but not yet visible. This is often when people say they feel blocked, even though nothing appears to be in the way. The block is not a wall. It is a recalibration. Old patterns of effort are no longer compatible with what is forming. New patterns have not yet fully arrived. In between, there is a gap where action does not land the way it used to. This gap can feel uncomfortable, especially for those who equate movement with safety. The idea that blocks must be overcome through willpower is deeply ingrained. It suggests that persistence is always the solution. But persistence assumes that the same internal state can be carried forward unchanged. When identity is shifting, that assumption no longer holds. The system is not asking for more force. It is asking for congruence. Until that congruence settles, effort scatters instead of consolidating. You may notice that when you try to push forward, the energy does not follow. Motivation feels neutral. Desire feels present but uncharged. This is not apathy. It is a sign that the usual feedback loop between intention and action is temporarily offline. Something more foundational is being adjusted. That adjustment does not respond to pressure. It responds to stability. This is why explanations based purely on discipline or mindset can feel insufficient here. They address surface mechanics, not underlying state. When state is in flux, surface mechanics lose their leverage. The system protects itself by slowing output until internal signals align. This is not sabotage. It is a form of intelligence that prioritizes integrity over momentum. Understanding this can relieve a great deal of self-directed frustration. If effort has not worked, it is not because you have failed to apply it correctly, it is because effort is no longer the primary lever. The block you perceive is not something to break through. It is something to pass through, and passing through does not require force. It requires allowing the internal update to complete. This reframing changes the emotional texture of being stuck. Instead of feeling deficient, you may begin to feel transitional. Instead of feeling behind, you may begin to sense that something is reorganizing beneath awareness. This does not create immediate clarity, but it does soften resistance. And softened resistance allows the system to finish what it has already started. When effort stops working, it is often because effort is no longer needed in the same way. The pause that follows is not empty. It is active in a quieter register. Recognizing that can turn confusion into curiosity is a far more accurate companion during times of internal change. Time is often experienced as something that moves forward in a straight line. Days follow days. Days follow days. Plans lead to outcomes. Effort accumulates into progress. This way of understanding time works well when external movement is the primary measure, but it becomes less useful when change is happening internally. Internal timing does not obey the same rules. It stretches, compresses, and sometimes pauses in ways that feel disconnected from calendars and expectations. Many people notice that awareness arrives before action. You may understand something long before you act on it. You may feel ready for a new phase while your life remains unchanged. This gap can create anxiety, especially if you believe readiness should immediately produce motion. But internal readiness and external movement are not the same event. Readiness is a signal. Movement is a response. And responses depend on conditions that are not always visible. Internal shifts often require a period of recalibration. During this time, the system is adjusting its reference points. Old assumptions loosen. New orientations begin to form. This process is subtle and largely unconscious. It does not announce itself. It does not come with instructions. It simply unfolds, asking for patience rather than intervention. When this recalibration is interrupted by urgency, it tends to slow down. The mind often interprets pauses as delays. It looks for reasons, causes, mistakes. It assumes that something has gone wrong. But pauses are not always errors. In many cases, they are transitions. They exist to allow one state to fully dissolve before another takes its place. Without this space, change becomes unstable. It may look fast, but it does not last. There is also a difference between waiting and being prepared. Waiting implies passivity. Preparation implies readiness without force. When internal timing is at work, preparation looks like stillness. It looks like neutrality. It looks like not needing to prove that something is happening. This can be difficult to trust, especially in cultures that reward constant output. But internal systems are not motivated by external validation. They move when alignment is sufficient. You may notice that your relationship with time itself has changed. The future feels closer, but less defined. The past feels less relevant, but not resolved in the way you expected. The present feels expanded, sometimes almost suspended. This is not disorientation. It is reorientation. Your system is learning to operate from a different internal clock, one that is less reactive and more responsive. Linear timelines suggest that effort today produces results tomorrow. Internal timelines suggest that integration today produces stability later. Integration cannot be rushed. It involves nervous system regulation, identity coherence, and emotional safety. These are not processes that respond to pressure. They respond to consistency and calm. When those conditions are present, movement resumes on its own. This is why forcing action during internal recalibration often feels draining. The energy does not return what is invested. The feedback loop feels broken. In reality, it is simply paused while the system updates its parameters. Once the update is complete, action becomes efficient again. Effort begins to land. Decisions feel clearer. Momentum returns without being chased. Understanding this can change how you relate to periods of stillness. Instead of seeing them as obstacles, you can begin to see them as necessary intervals. They are not gaps in progress. They are part of the architecture of change. Without them, movement would be brittle. With them, movement becomes sustainable. This does not mean you must enjoy the pause. It only means you do not need to fear it. Fear adds friction. Friction extends the process. Calm allows the process to complete itself. When you remove the demand for immediate results, internal timing has room to express itself naturally. As awareness increases, movement often follows quietly. Not all change arrives with noise. Some of the most significant shifts happen without announcement. They reveal themselves only when you realize that something you once struggled to do now feels effortless. That is when you know the pause was not a delay. It was a preparation. This section does not ask you to abandon your sense of direction. It only asks you to loosen your grip on the clock. When you do, the space between readiness and movement begins to make sense. And in that understanding, anxiety softens, replaced by a steadier sense of trust in the timing that is already at work. When people hear the word a block, they often imagine something heavy or dramatic: fear, trauma, self-doubt, a lack of discipline. These explanations are common because they are familiar. They give the mind something solid to work with. But the block you are approaching here does not fit into those categories. It is quieter than that, and because it is quiet, it is often overlooked. This block does not feel like resistance. It does not show up as panic or avoidance. In many cases, it does not feel negative at all. Life may feel manageable. Emotions may feel regulated. You may even feel clear about what you want or what comes next. And yet, there is a sense that something is holding just short of moving forward. Not pulling back, not pushing away, simply holding. What makes this block difficult to recognize is that it does not argue with you. It does not create inner conflict. Instead, it creates neutrality. A calm pause where momentum should be. The mind looks for familiar explanations, but none of them quite fit. You are not afraid. You are not unmotivated. P. You are not confused. And still, movement does not happen. At this level, the block is not about capability or desire. It is about permission. Specifically, they require the nervous system to register that a new level of expression will not compromise safety, belonging, or stability. Until that registration happens, expansion remains theoretical. This is why effort does not resolve this block. Effort assumes readiness is already complete. It assumes the system has given consent. But consent is not a thought. It is a felt sense. It is the body agreeing with the direction the mind has already chosen. When that agreement is missing, even slightly, movement stalls without friction. This absence of internal permission often develops during periods of rapid internal growth. Awareness expands faster than embodiment can keep up with. The mind adapts quickly. It understands new perspectives, new possibilities, new identities. The body, however, moves more slowly. It needs repetition, stability, and reassurance. When awareness runs ahead, the system creates a pause to close the gap. This pause is the block, not as a punishment, but as a protection. It ensures that when movement resumes, it does so from a place of coherence. Without this pause, change would feel destabilizing. Even positive shifts can feel threatening if they arrive faster than the system can integrate them. The block prevents that mismatch. Many people misinterpret this state as self-sabotage. They assume that something unconscious is working against them. In reality, something unconscious is working for them. It is ensuring that the next step does not require constant effort to maintain. Sustainable change requires safety. Safety requires internal agreement. Agreement cannot be forced. You may notice that when you imagine moving forward, there is no fear, but there is also no charge. The image feels flat, neutral. This is not disinterest. It is the absence of internal permission. The system has not yet registered that the new identity is familiar enough to inhabit. Familiarity breeds safety. Safety allows motion. This block often lifts quietly, not through confrontation, but through settling. As the nervous system acclimates to the idea of the new identity, permission begins to form naturally. It does not announce itself. One day, action simply feels easier. Decisions require less effort. Momentum appears without being summoned. Understanding this reframes the entire experience. You are not being tested. You are not being delayed. You are not being asked to fix anything. You are being allowed time to fully arrive at a new internal state before expressing it externally. This is a form of precision, not hesitation. The block is hidden because it does not look like a problem. It looks like nothing. And in a culture that equates nothing with failure, that can be unsettling. But nothing is not empty here. It is full of adjustment. full of quiet recalibration, full of preparation that does not need supervision. This does not require you to grant permission consciously. Conscious permission is already present. What is forming now is somatic permission, the body's agreement, the system's readiness to move without bracing. When that agreement completes itself, movement resumes as if it were always meant to. The block then is not something to remove. It is something to finish. And finishing does not require action. It requires allowing the system to recognize its own safety in becoming what it is already moving toward. That recognition is subtle. But once it settles, the sense of being held in place dissolves. Not because you pushed through it, but because it was no longer needed. The nervous system plays a quieter role in change than the mind does, but it is no less influential. While the mind can imagine futures, set intentions, and understand concepts, the nervous system determines whether those futures feel safe enough to approach. It does this continuously without commentary. It scans for familiarity, stability, and coherence. When those elements are present, movement feels natural. When they are not, the system slows things down. This slowing is rarely experienced as fear. It is more often experienced as hesitation without anxiety, or stillness without distress. The body does not send alarm signals. It simply withholds the green light. From the outside, this can look like inactivity. From the inside, it feels like waiting without tension. This is the nervous system doing exactly what it is designed to do. Expansion requires more energy than maintenance. Any move into a new identity, rule, or way of being asks the system to reorganize its internal breathing, posture, attention, emotional regulation, and self-perception all adjust together. If that adjustment happens too quickly, it can create instability. The nervous system prevents this by regulating the pace of change. It prioritizes sustainability over speed. This is why people sometimes feel mentally ready for change long before their bodies fall. The mind can leap ahead. The body needs evidence. It needs repetition and consistency to register safety. Until that happens, the system remains in a holding pattern. This is not resistance, it is regulation. When manifestation or movement stalls, it is often because the nervous system is integrating a new level of self. Integration is not passive. It is an active process that happens beneath awareness. Old patterns release, new baselines form. The system tests and retests its responses. All of this takes place quietly without conscious involvement. Trying to override this process usually creates more delay. Pressure signals threat. Urgency signals instability. The nervous system responds to both by tightening its grip. This does not mean you should avoid desire or intention. It simply means that calm consistency is more effective than force. Safety is communicated through steadiness, not insistence. You may notice that when you stop trying to make things happen, the internal atmosphere changes. Breathing deepens, attention softens, thoughts slow down. This is not giving up. It is creating the conditions under which the nervous system can complete its work. From this state, movement often resumes on its own. The role of the nervous system also explains why restlessness can appear without clear cause. The system is active but not outwardly expressive. Energy is being used internally. This can feel like unused potential when in reality it is being invested in stabilization. Once stabilization is complete, that same energy becomes available for expression. Trust is central here. Not blind trust, but somatic trust, the kind that is felt rather than believed. When the nervous system senses that it does not need to protect against change, it allows expansion. That permission cannot be argued into existence. It must be felt, and feeling takes time. And feeling takes time. This perspective removes the pressure to constantly monitor progress. Progress is happening whether you track it or not. The nervous system does not require supervision. It requires space. Space to recalibrate, to test, to settle. When given that space, it completes its adjustments efficiently. As this process unfolds, you may begin to notice subtle shifts. A reduction in internal friction, a sense of quiet confidence. Decisions that once felt heavy begin to feel neutral or even obvious. These are signs that the system is aligning. They are not dramatic, but they are reliable. The pause you may be experiencing is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something is being integrated at a foundational level. The nervous system is preparing the ground so that when movement resumes, it does not require constant FAT to maintain. This understanding allows you to relate to stillness differently. Instead of interpreting it as a lack of progress, you can see it as part of the process itself. When the body feels safe, change becomes inevitable, and safety, once established, does not need to be rushed. There is a moment that often arrives just before meaningful change, and it rarely looks the way people expect. It does not feel like excitement or certainty. More often, it feels like friction without force, a sense of being held in place while something gathers quietly beneath the surface. This moment is easy to misread because it does not announce its purpose. It simply exists, asking to be noticed rather than resolved. Many people interpret this experience as a sign that they are doing something wrong. The absence of movement is taken as evidence of failure or misalignment. But this interpretation overlooks an important pattern. Blocks tend to appear not at the beginning of change, but near the threshold of it. They surface when the system is close enough to transformation that stability becomes essential. At this stage, the block is no longer solid. It is more like a residue of an old structure that has already begun to dissolve. You can sense it because it is loosening. If it were fully intact, you would not be aware of it at all. Awareness itself is a sign of proximity. When something is about to shift, it often becomes perceptible in a new way. This is why frustration can feel sharper right before change. Not because the block has strengthened, but because it is weakening. The system is transitioning, and transitions create sensation. What you are noticing is not resistance intensifying, but resistance losing its coherence. It no longer holds the same authority. And that change creates awareness. There is also a subtle reorientation happening here. Attention begins to move away from what is not happening and toward what is preparing to happen. This does not feel like hope or anticipation. It feels quieter than that. It feels like readiness without expectation, a sense that something is aligning, even if you cannot yet see how. The ability to notice the block without being consumed by it is significant. Earlier phases often involve being inside the block, identifying with it, or trying to overcome it. This phase involves observing it. Observation creates distance. Distance reduces control. As control weakens, the block loses its function. This is why reassurance becomes possible here. Not reassurance from external sources, but an internal settling. The urgency fades. The need to understand every detail softens. You may find that you care less about timing and more about coherence. This shift signals that the system is preparing to move forward without strain. Change that arrives after this phase often feels anticlimactic. It does not feel like a breakthrough. It feels like relief, like something finally aligning that had been slightly off. The absence of drama does not mean the change is small. It means it is integrated. Integrated change does not need to announce itself. Recognizing this pattern can transform how you relate to the block. Instead of seeing it as an obstacle, you can begin to see it as a marker, a signpost indicating that something is close, not in a predictive sense, but in a structural one. The system does not create these sensations randomly. They appear when conditions are shifting. This understanding does not require optimism. It does not ask you to believe that everything will work out. It simply invites you to notice where you are in the process. And where you are now is not at the beginning. It is not even in the middle. It is near the point where internal alignment becomes external movement. The block you are aware of is already changing. Awareness is not passive. It alters the thing it observes. By noticing the block without trying to fix it, you allow it to continue loosening. This is not something you need to manage. It is something that is already underway. What once felt like being held back begins to feel like being held steady. And there is an important difference between those two experiences. One implies limitation. The other implies preparation. When preparation completes itself, movement follows naturally. Naturally. This is not a promise of immediate change. It is a recognition of position. And position matters. Knowing that you are close without needing to define how close can transform frustration into reassurance. That reassurance is not forced. It emerges on its own as the system continues to realign. Release is often imagined as something noticeable, a moment of clarity, a decision that feels final, a sense of certainty that replaces hesitation. But in practice, release really arrives with clear edges. It is subtle. It feels more like a quiet exhale than a turning point. If you are expecting something dramatic, it is easy to miss. When release begins, it does not announce itself as freedom. It shows up as ease, small, almost unremarkable shifts in how things feel. Thoughts that once looped lose their grip. Decisions that once required effort begin to feel neutral. There is no rush to act, and no need to hold back. Movement becomes optional rather than urgent. This is why release is difficult to describe. It does not feel like gaining something new. It feels like setting something down without realizing you were carrying it. The absence is gentle. There is no contrast sharp enough to mark the change. You notice it only because the internal environment feels quieter. In this state, clarity does not arrive as answers. It arrives as a reduction in noise. You may find that questions no longer press for resolution. They remain unanswered, but they also lose importance. The mind stops reaching forward and the body settles into the present without effort. This is not disengagement. It is alignment. There is also a noticeable drop in internal effort. You stop trying to manage your state. You stop checking whether you feel ready or behind. Attention softens, and with it, the sense of being on the verge of something dissolves. What replaces it is a grounded neutrality, not apathy, just steadiness. Release does not require you to visualize outcomes or rehearse future versions of yourself. In fact, imagining too much can pull you out of it. Release is not about directing energy. It is about allowing energy to redistribute on its own. When that happens, action becomes simpler because it is no longer compensating for tension. You may notice that your relationship with possibility changes. Possibilities feel less charged. They do not demand evaluation. They exist as options rather than expectations. This makes them easier to approach when the time comes. Without pressure, movement becomes responsive instead of reactive. Another sign of release is a shift in pacing. Time feels less compressed. There is less sense of urgency around what comes next. This does not lead to stagnation. It leads to more accurate timing. Actions happen when they fit, not when they are forced. This accuracy creates a sense of quiet confidence. What is important here is that release does not feel like relief in the emotional sense. It feels like normal, like returning to a baseline that does not require explanation. Because of this, it is easy to overlook. Many people pass through release without recognizing it, assuming nothing has changed. But something has. The system has settled. This settled state is not permanent. It is transitional in a different way. It marks the point where integration has completed enough for movement to resume naturally. From here, change does not require preparation. It unfolds as part of daily life. Small actions lead to larger shifts without strain. You may find that decisions arise spontaneously, not impulsively, but clearly. There is less debate, less hesitation, not because you have answers, but because you no longer feel misaligned. The internal signal that once withheld permission has quiet. In its place is a sense of readiness that does not need validation. Release does not ask you to notice it. It simply changes how things feel. The absence of friction becomes the indicator. When effort drops away, when clarity feels unforced, when the future feels less heavy, release is already underway. This is not something you need to chase. If anything, chasing would disrupt it. Release happens when attention rests rather than reaches. When it does, the system continues forward on its own terms, guided by a steadiness that no longer needs explanation. This section does not point toward a result. It points toward a sensation. The sensation of being no longer held in place without yet needing to move. That sensation is enough. It signals that what was paused has begun to rejoin the flow, quietly and without resistance. At a certain point in this process, the urge to fix things begins to soften, not because everything has resolved, but because the need to intervene no longer feels necessary. The system recognizes that it is capable of completing its own adjustments. This recognition brings a deep sense of rest, even if circumstances have not changed. The instinct to fix usually comes from care, not control. It is a way of trying to support movement when uncertainty is present. But when the underlying state is already shifting, fixing can become interference. Not in a dramatic way, in a subtle one. It adds effort where effort is no longer required. This is often the stage where guidance that once felt helpful begins to feel intrusive. Not because it is wrong, but because it addresses a problem that is already dissolving. The system no longer needs direction. It needs space. Space to settle into what has already been integrated. Letting go of fixing does not mean becoming passive. It means recognizing when involvement creates noise instead of clarity. There is a difference between participation and interference. Participation is responsive, interference is reactive. When the system is realigning, responsiveness naturally increases as reactivity falls away. You may notice that when you stop trying to adjust your internal state, it stabilizes on its own. Emotions regulate without effort. Thoughts pass through without being managed. Attention remains present without being held in place. This is not something you do, it is something that happens when the pressure to optimize disappears. There is often relief here, but it is not emotional relief. It is functional relief. It is functional relief. The relief of not needing to monitor yourself, of not needing to check whether you are on track, of not needing to measure progress. The system no longer asks for feedback. It trusts its own trajectory. This trust is not a belief. It is an embodied sense that nothing is missing, that nothing needs to be added or removed. From this place, even uncertainty feels manageable. Not because answers have appeared, but because the absence of answers no longer creates tension. Non-interference allows processes to complete themselves. This is true physically, emotionally, and internally. When a process is interrupted repeatedly, it extends. When it is left alone, it resolves. This principle applies here. By not fixing, you allow integration to finalize without disruption. This does not require discipline or restraint. It happens naturally when the urge to act dissolves. You may find that you simply forget to interfere. Attention shifts elsewhere. The internal process continues quietly in the background, without supervision. As this happens, the sense of being in between begins to fade. Not replaced by certainty, but by presence. You are no longer waiting for something to happen. You are simply here, and being here feels sufficient. From sufficiency, movement emerges organically. This is why rest becomes important at this stage. Not rest as withdrawal, but rest as non-engagement. Allowing the system to complete its work without commentary. When that work is finished, action will not need encouragement. It will feel obvious. There is nothing you need to correct in yourself right now. Nothing to fine-tune. Nothing to resolve. The impulse to fix was useful earlier. It brought awareness. Now awareness is already present. What remains is allowing that awareness to do what it naturally does when it is not directed. This section is not about surrender in a dramatic sense. It is about quiet permission. Permission for things to be as they are while they continue to change. That permission creates a deep relaxation, one that supports completion rather than delaying it. When interference stops, integration finishes. And when integration finishes, movement resumes without effort. That is the simplicity of this phase. Nothing needs to be done for it to unfold.